Hey, American Lit. This is the lesson for Wednesday, April 15th. Today we're taking a look at Stephen Crane's short story, The Men in the Storm, which is in your close reader if you have that. You can do it on your physical close reader. If you don't, you can access it through the online textbook as I'm doing here. We're going to start by just helping you out getting to this in the online textbook because the page numbers are a little wonky here. So a couple different ways you can do that. You can, once you get into the online textbook, you can go to contents, click on that. If you're not already in collection 5, that's our current unit, you click on that and then you look for the close reader Men in the Storm, which is right after To Build a Fire, which you guys just read. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to get into the textbook itself, and then you have this box at the top for Go To Page, and you're going to type in CR 73, which is where this starts. So you have to make sure you have that CR in there. If you just type in 73, it goes to way earlier in the textbook. That's not where you want to be. All right, so to get us started with this text, we're going to begin with some background on the author. Let's see if I can make this just a little bit bigger. Now this is about as big as we're going to get. So I'll read it out. So this is by Stephen Crane, who you can see had a pretty short lifespan, just barely made it into 1900. But he was a novelist, poet, and short story writer. And he was one of the most innovative writers of his generation, known for his gritty realism and willingness to take on difficult themes such as fear, social isolation, and spiritual crisis. And you guys should know from that video you just watched that these are really not themes, particularly. These are motifs or subjects. So themes, we have a different definition. So just keep that in mind, because theme actually is going to be your short response at the end of this text. He is perhaps best known for his Civil War novel, The Red Badge of Courage, which depicts the psychological complexities of the battlefield. Crane, who dropped out of college and moved to New York to be a writer, had an adventurous life that was tragically cut short when he died of tuberculosis at the age of 28. His work was nearly forgotten until 2 decades later when it was rediscovered by critics. So, like London, he also had an adventurous life, right? Talking about the Civil War here, as well as he lived a short life, right? He sort of lived hard and fast. The brightest flame burns quickest, I guess is the phrase. So whereas London lived to 41, he lived to 28. So both short lives, but very adventurous. So he had a lot of real world experience to draw on for his works. Before we read the actual text, before we jump into it, I'd like us to preview what you're going to be asked to respond to at the end of this. This is primarily what I'm going to be looking at for a grade, so that you guys have a heads up and you know sort of what you're reading for. So if you want to go to CR 83, that is the, CR 82 is the last page of this text. So the question you're going to be asked to answer is identify the theme of the story and explain how its central ideas develop, interact, and build on one another throughout the course of the text. And you're supposed to cite textual evidence. So here, as I said, it's focusing on theme. We have a definition of theme, right? That's the author's central idea, right, about an important subject. And to give you some idea, something to start with, right, we're studying realist and naturalist works, right? These are in the naturalist and realist styles and genres. So if you're looking for a subject to think about, nature is definitely a good one to start with. If you're thinking, okay, what is the topic Crane is trying to speak about in this work? I would definitely go first to nature. And then as sort of a secondary topic, humans, right? And so try to think when you're coming up with this theme, how you can how those two subjects are interacting, right? The the idea of nature and what nature is doing, and then how humans are interacting with those. For the second part of this question, explain how its central ideas develop, interact, and build on one another. Essentially, what you're doing there is you are showing with specific evidence from the text and your explanations of that evidence from beginning to end, how that theme, where you see that theme coming through. So I would give use ICE, right? Introduce, cite, and explain your evidence, but give a chronological account of where you see evidence of that theme coming through and explanations that point to it. So that's just a little preview of the question that you're going to be asked to respond to. Let's jump back to 73. I'm going to go through these annotations that you're going to be asked to do. I'm not going to be checking annotations for this, just so you know. I'm going to be checking the short response that you're supposed to write at the end, and there will be a Google form for that. But the annotations are useful for you to collect that evidence. It'll guide you in collecting that evidence to point you in the right direction towards making a good theme statement. So we will be, I'll be modeling how to best do this. So let's take a look at this. Lines 1 through 27 begin to collect and cite text evidence. Underline images that help you visualize the weather. Remember, naturalist and realist works use stark imagery. They really highlight and clearly visualize what it's like to be in these places. Highlight images of street life. So this is taking place in an urban environment. And then in the margin, describe the setting. So let's get started. At about 3 o'clock of the February afternoon, the blizzard began to swirl great clouds of snow against the streets, sweeping it down from the roofs and up from the pavements until the faces of pedestrians tingled and burned as from 1,000 needle prickings. Those on the walks huddled their necks closely in the collars of their coats and went along stooping like a race of aged people. Okay, and we're going to just pause right there because right away we can underline this, right? These are specific details that are helping us very clearly visualize not only what it looks like to be there, but I'm getting a sense of what it feels like to be there too, right? I can imagine being in the cold, living in Wisconsin, we know this, right? Living in the cold, we know how it can tingle and burn for it to be that cold out. And then we're also looking at images of city life, right? And, those on the walks, I would circle this, right? People are walking down the street, they're huddling against the cold, they're stooping. And there's, drivers of carriages, I think, just sort of going along their way on the streets. So moving on, they were made more cruel by the exposure of their positions aloft on high seats. The streetcars bound uptown went slowly, the horses slipping and straining in the spongy brown mass that lay between the rails. The drivers, muffled to the eyes, stood erect and facing the wind, models of grim philosophy. Overhead, the trains rumbled and roared, and the dark structure of the elevated railroad stretching over the avenue dripped little streams and drops of water upon the mud and snow beneath it. Okay, so more images of street life I'm seeing here. I see, streetcars that are going, think of like, rail cars on the street, horses slipping and straining. So I can clearly imagine that. The drivers muffled to the eyes, another clear image that helps me really imagine that clearly. And overhead, the trains rumbled and roared. So I can imagine the sounds of that, right? So that's auditory imagery. And if I'm thinking to myself, so I'm being asked in these first 13 lines, what is the setting? Well, the setting, if I were to sum it up really briefly, right, this is a winter blizzard in a big city, right? Usually big cities are the ones that are going to have the elevated trains and streetcars going through it. So this is winter in a busy big city. Okay. Moving on, and let's see if we have another prompt here. So they're asking us to stop at line 27, describe the contrast between the storm outside and the people who remain inside. So let's read on about that. All the clatter of the street was softened by the masses that lay upon the cobbles until, even to one who looked from a window, it became important music, a melody of life made necessary to the ear by the dreariness of the pitiless beat and sweep of the storm. Occasionally one could see black figures of men busily shoveling the white drifts from the locks. The sounds from their labor created new recollections of rural experiences, which every man manages to have in a measure. Later, the immense windows of the shops became aglow with light, throwing great beams of orange and yellow upon the pavement, where they were infinitely cheerful, yet in a way that accented the force and discomfort of the storm, and gave a meaning to the pace of the people and the vehicles. Scores of pedestrians and drivers. Scores is like, a score is 20, so there's multiples of 20. Wretched, with cold faces, necks, and feet, speeding for scores of unknown doors and entrances, scattering to an infinite variety of shelters, to places which the imagination made warm with the familiar colors of home. All right. So we are still circling, right? Circling images of city life, and I can imagine clearly these black figures of men busily shoveling white drifts from the walks, right, trying to clear the snow. I can also imagine just the mass of people out there, right? There's scores of pedestrians, so multiples of 20, right? Out there, probably hundreds. Pedestrians wretched, right? So they look really unhappy. I'm imagining that. Necks and feet speeding for scores. So all these little places that they're trying to get away from the storm to an infinite variety of shelters. So I'm getting a very clear description of the setting, which you guys are finding with these realist and naturalist works that we're studying. But having reread that, let's look at the contrast. So we get a contrast between people outside and people inside, right? We see these, the shops are aglow with life, right? And they were infinitely cheerful, right? So people inside are happy. There's a sense of a good mood going on inside. People are feeling good. And this is a stark contrast with, the people outside, right? Who are, shoveling great drifts from the walks, right? And let's see if we got something else. There's, this right next to this infinitely cheerful quote that we just had. There are people outside that are experiencing great discomfort of the storm, right? So this is a major contrast. The people inside are very comfortable and happy. The people outside are experiencing great discomfort. And so often this is called juxtaposition, when an author will take two contrasting ideas, put them next to each other to make a point. And the point here, I'm understanding just how uncomfortable these are by the contrast to the people outside, by the people that are inside, right? And this is all something we can relate to. Living in Wisconsin, we often, if we're out in a city, we see people warm inside, and we're like, man, I really wish I was in there. That would feel a lot better than being out here. Okay. So you will continue like this to make these observations about the experience of these people and the focus here is on the people that are in the storm, right? As the title suggests, and the video that you watched before this indicated that titles are really important. It's about the men in the storm, right? And so focus on that. What is the author trying to communicate about nature and about how that can affect people in that environment? Your theme should have some sort of opinion that pertains to that. And you're going to get, as the story goes on, there's a increasing intensity that develops that you'll be able to see by these people as they experience the harshness of their environment. So I look forward to reading those responses. Please do feel free to email me with any questions, and have a great rest of your day.